Welcome into episode 194. Be sure you're following us on Twitter at Bailey J. Adams22, at by CA Simmons, at Night Sports Now, and at Pegasus Podcast. Christian, it's Sunday. Is this our first Sunday podcast? No, it's not. I lied. It's not.
It's definitely not. You know what we recorded on
Mhm.
Sunday? We recorded two podcasts on the same Sunday one
Yeah, I
time.
just thought about that.
Yeah.
I think we did we did the bowl destination one last year for the Duke game, I believe,
Yep.
because I was missing. I wasn't a missing person, but I missed the end of the conference championship game when you were in New Orleans. And so we did the Duke one. But yeah, we talked about this on the podcast,
We've
right?
mentioned this repeatedly over the
Yeah.
years, I feel like.
How
Yeah.
we recorded a Mikey Keene is the starter podcast in 2022. And then later that day had to record a JRP as the starting quarterback because we were trying to get ahead of it.
Yeah, because you
yeah.
had your mom's retirement party or something
Right.
like that. So I wanted to just go ahead and record it and have it ready, which I know that we've told this story before, and I'm going to say again for the billionth time. We weren't just that much of thinking we're awesome and know everything. Like, we were told Mikey Keene was going to be announced the starter, as a lot of people were that day. So we're not that crazy. But yeah, and then we recorded the JRP one later.
Yeah.
Can I say a thing before we do anything else on this
Let's do it.
podcast? Because not only is it Sunday, it is a very important day. It is one of the most important days of the entire year. If you are watching the YouTube version of this podcast, you will notice that I'm wearing a space jersey, which I don't usually do on this podcast. I'm wearing the space jersey in celebration of the fact that the UniSwag Uniform of the Year award voting has opened today, and UCF is up for it for their space uniform. Once again, the Canabro blue ones that we all love this year and cherish because they beat Oklahoma State and because there were also some incredible, freaking awesome uniforms. If you are listening to this podcast and you have even 1% of liking me, of like Bailey and I have like helped you enjoy your day at some point, or you enjoy this podcast, and that means a lot to us that you're here. But if you like this podcast at all and have ever enjoyed it, even a single second of it, because I know some of it's bad, the way that you can pay us back is by voting right now, as I say this, for UCF in the UniSwag competition. If you're wondering where to find the link, it's in the bio of this podcast. And if you're on YouTube, it's in the bio of the YouTube video. Just there's the link, click it, vote it. Do me a favor, refresh the page and vote one more time. That's all I'm asking, is 2 votes from each of you. And I think that will help. So why don't we all do that? If you're listening to this, please do it. I'm not a fan of you if you don't. So there, that's I think I covered it. Cool.
You don't want Christian to not be a fan of you, so you got to.
Even though many of you are not a fan of me, you don't want me to not be a fan of you.
I love that idea that people listen to this podcast and they're like, they don't like either of us. They don't like you. And I'm like, huh.
I know of several people who listen to this podcast.
I know.
Sort of out of a hate thing.
But yeah, so while you were doing that whole thing, I just voted again. So doing my part.
It finally, you're supposed to be able to vote as many times as you can. It finally kicked me out today because I was doing it too much. It just hit me with a red forbidden on the screen when I tried to do it again. So yeah. I tried.
Okay, so I was gonna say too, the reason we're recording on a Sunday, you have an early podcast drop this week, is we talked about it last week, and I don't want to say warned you guys, but told you guys we'd have an early podcast because I'm flying up to Indianapolis for the NFL Combine on Monday afternoon. So we wouldn't have any time. It's not like, I mean, we were able to squeeze in a podcast, and it was difficult to do so when I was in Alabama for the Senior Bowl, but I just don't think it would have been possible.
This one I think we tried to do this last year, and it was very difficult.
I can't remember because I don't.
Did we?
We recorded. Oh, what I told you was I left on a Tuesday last year, so we recorded on Monday.
Okay. Yeah, because you're busy. Like this, I mean, you're busy at the Senior Bowl. I don't want to downplay your Senior Bowl contributions, but the combine's a whole other thing. But one more thing on the uniforms, I forgot. Also, if you're someone who like doesn't care, you're like, uniforms, whatever. UCF is up against Miami. UCF is up against Florida. UCF is up against 4 other Big 12 teams. So lots at stake here. Please go help UCF win this competition. Appreciate you.
I haven't been on Twitter a ton today. Have you seen this Cam Newton thing?
No.
Apparently, like 3 people he took on 3 people. They tried to fight him.
On the field, surely.
No, not on he's at some event, it looks like, and he's like under a tent, and it just says Cam Newton took on 3 guys and didn't flinch.
Oh, I'm
watching. I don't know what happened there.
Whoa. Wow, he throws one guy like.
Yeah. That's Gus Malzahn's former quarterback. That's relevant to the podcast. I don't know. I was on Twitter looking for the Uniswag thing, and that just was one of the things that popped up. So
if I'm Cam Newton, I would want everyone to watch this video. 3 guys jump him and they can't do a thing.
He should get an NFL tryout again for that. Like, he should get back into the league. People
if I was an NFL team, if I was a GM, I would see that video and be like, he still has the passion,
still has the
passion of competition, and he's still physical. He can still play, like, and now maybe those 3 guys aren't as big as like, a defensive end, but still, I think it's worth considering. But
yeah. So yeah, early podcast, combine.
I'm making that the title of the podcast now. It's going to be at what episode is this?
194.
Pegasus Podcast episode 194. Cam Newton fight with a question mark, and then we'll just see how that does.
That's great. All right. Well, we're really here to talk about now that we're like 10 minutes in, is the latest with college football playoff expansion and all of that.
Yep.
I don't want to say nonsense, but
It's kind of
there's a lot.
nonsense.
There's a lot going on. There's a lot going on. So that's why like Christian had to give me a refresher, which would be a surprise to no one who listens to this podcast before we started recording, because that's the thing is like I will see tweets from just on Twitter or you'll send me some and it's like they're discussing this, they're discussing this, they're discussing this, and I'm like, what? Like, what are we doing? Like, it's just like get to the point. I told you at one point, I was like, I'm afraid that they're never gonna settle on anything because they don't know what they're gonna do once the meetings stop. They're like, we have to keep having discussions
Well, they've set a
because
deadline on themselves, which they've never done before, and it's pretty notable.
stunning.
I know. So, and that's the thing is, and that's why I kind of wanted to do this for a topic on the podcast too, just the playoff changes and what they mean for UCF and for the Big 12, because I sometimes forget how much of a bubble I'm in and that the average human being and even average college football fan doesn't obsess over the non-on-field stuff the way I do. I'm just kind of fascinated by it and I read it a lot, and then I forget
Especially
that
in
not
February.
and I forget that like most of you have better things to do with your time in February than read about the latest college football playoff meeting,
Yeah.
and I applaud you for that and worry for myself. But all that being said, is now that some of the news was leaking out because there were some big stories written about their most recent meeting, I've seen more than a few UCF fans commenting, and it seems like I forget that not everyone knows how this stuff works or where we're going to land. So felt like we could do a nice explainer podcast where we talk about this new, very stupid playoff they're lasering in on and what it's going to mean for UCF and why we should all cry.
So we should probably mention the good one first, right? Like how the good one they're only going to do
Yes.
2 years.
So starting, as I think everyone listening knows, that there's a 12-team playoff starting in 2024, the one that's been talked about since 2021. That playoff is going to be for the 24 season and 25 season. It's a 12-team playoff. The format they settled on after a couple tweaks is that it's called 5+7. The five highest ranked conference champions by the playoff committee will automatically make the playoff, and then the 7 next highest ranked teams will also make it. 5 highest ranked conference champions obviously means that every year it would be the SEC, the Big 10, the Big 12, and the ACC, and then that 5th spot means that a G5 team gets to participate as well. Then the next 7 at large. And what makes that playoff so awesome is and why 12 teams was freaking perfect, and why I was so excited they're actually going to do this for a couple years at least, is that it's the first time in college football history that at the start of every single team season, all 134 of them, there is an actual path to the playoff. If you're in the Power 5, you know what you have to do. If you're in the group of 5, you know if you go undefeated, you'll get that spot. You'll be in. It's access for everyone. And what's great about the format is it's access not at the cost of the regular season. Those 12 teams are divided into 4 groups. It's the top 4 teams are going to get a first round bye. And what's cool is you have to be a conference champion to get that bye, which means that conference title games are going to have so much weight now. Like those games are going to be crazy this year in 2024. Like imagine a Big 12 title game where it's, I don't know, like we'll put UCF in there. Why not? It's UCF podcast. It's UCF and Utah this year, KJ Jefferson versus Cam Rising. And the winner is guaranteed a bye in the first round of the playoff. And the loser, who knows? Maybe they don't make it at all. Maybe they have to go on the road. That the stakes will be crazy. Then the next 4 are the 4 teams that will host a playoff game in the first round, and they will host it on their campuses. Then the next 4 are the teams that will go on the road.
So those 5, 6, 7, and 8 are hosting.
Yeah, 5, 6, 7, 8 host. And what makes it cool about that too is that instead of like having to have like number 12, who will certainly be the group of 5 team most years, go up against the number 1 team in the country, they'll go up against number 5. It makes it more, those first round games will be super competitive because they're all closely ranked. And it preserves the regular season because there's different things you're playing for. Alabama can't just, Alabama, I guess, is the wrong example now because Nick Saban's gone.
It's so
Georgia
weird that you said
will
that.
say, it is weird, right? That was a really weird thing to realize. But
well,
Georgia,
I was looking at people's projections and it was like projecting Ole Miss as the SEC like champion or like things like that, or Georgia, and I'm like, there was no Alabama in it, and I was like, why is? And I was like, oh yeah, that's right, Saban's gone.
But
so.
you preserve the regular season because Georgia can't just say, well, it's the top 12 teams will always be top 12. I mean, you drop a late November game, it's the difference between a bye in the first round and maybe you having to go on the road, and suddenly now you're playing at Columbus or something when you thought that you weren't going to be playing in that round. I mean, that's valuable. So that system's awesome. We're all in favor of it. They're already getting rid of it before they've played it. We're going to do it for 2 years. And it's going to be gone. So let me run you through what the latest intel is per The Athletic and Ross Dellinger and Pete Thamel at ESPN, and then we can discuss what it means for UCF, what it means for the Big 12. So obviously, since the 12-team format was designed, college football has changed a little tiny bit. Texas and Oklahoma have gone to the SEC, USC, UCLA, Oregon, and Washington have gone to the Big 10, and Utah, Arizona State, and Colorado have gone to the Big 12, and the group of 5s reorganized itself. So things are a little different.
And all the ACC stuff.
And the ACC is gonna maybe blow up at some point.
SMU, SMU and
right.
Cal.
Oh my God, I forgot that part. Yeah, and the ACC.
I was waiting
SMU,
to see
Cal,
if you're going to get
Stanford.
all of them.
Man, I was so close. Thank you for that. That one's still the most random one. Like I'll see an ACC graphic that includes the Cal logo and just get so confused. But anyway, So the reason that the 12 team only lasts 2 years is because the current college football playoff contract that was signed in 2014 runs through 2026. So they modified the current playoff. After 2026, there is no contract. So they have to start from scratch. They could have said, let's just roll the 12 team thing over. Instead, the Big Ten and SEC in particular are saying, no, we want to completely and totally start from scratch and come up with a new format. According to The Athletic and Ross Dellinger and Pete Thamel, they've been meeting for a couple weeks, the college football playoff committee. What they're settling on is a number of teams that the Big Ten has really been pushing, and that's 14 teams instead of 12. Might be thinking 14 teams is a weird number. You're right, it is. And it's based on the fact that the Big Ten and the SEC obviously have a lot more teams now than they did the last time around, so they're concerned about, even though everyone understands that of the 7 at-large spots in a 12-team playoff, the SEC and Big Ten would command the vast majority of those spots almost every year. It's not good enough. So the 14 teams, we kind of figured the writing was on the wall for that one a little bit. What gets weird is how they're going to decide who makes the playoff, because wow, is it different than everything we know from college football. And again, nothing's been confirmed yet. They've set a deadline on themselves. Bill Hancock, who you all remember from when he would go on TV and say UCF isn't good a few years ago, has said that
they're worse than a 3-loss Mississippi State team.
That's the one I'll never forget. Of all the teams that were ranked ahead of UCF,
that's the example. Yeah,
3-loss Mississippi State. But anyway, he said that they have to have it done within a month because ESPN has a contract on the table for them to sign for a 12-team playoffs. It's going to have to change anyway. And ESPN is reportedly, according to The Athletic, getting very upset at the childish nature of these negotiations for college football. But anyway, the way that they are going to decide who the 14 teams are is that instead of having a committee like rank teams, as basically how college football's worked as long as college football's existed, they want to actually seriously base it on auto bids for different conferences. And what they are floating around now and what the debate is around is that the SEC and the Big Ten want 4 auto bids for each of their conferences. And it's not rankings, it's standings is what they're looking at. So the way it'll work is that the top 4 SEC teams and the top 4 Big Ten teams automatically go to the playoff. They have a slot like that every year. They're also talking about multiple, in quotes, for the ACC and Big 12. What that sounds like is 2 each, that the top 2 Big 12 teams and top 2 ACC teams automatically go. And then they'll have a spot for the G5, and that will leave, that's 13 we're up to already. That leaves 1 spot that's an at-large for the next highest ranked team. That spot is essentially there for if Notre Dame's good. And so that's where we're at. That's what we're moving towards. Again, now this could all change. They're going to keep meeting throughout the month, and I'm a little skeptical if they're going to settle on that exact format or if there will be more changes. But we are absolutely moving into the world of auto bids, which really, really dramatically changes college football and makes it a lot more like the NFL, because now it's very little of the whole, what college football has always been, style points and how much did you win this game by, or your ranking and what that means. And it's really just, did you finish in the top 4 of your conference standings? Or if you're in the Big Ten and SEC, and if it's in the Big 12, did you finish in the top 2? And that might eventually, Ross Dellinger floated that might eventually in the pretty near future lead to the end of conference title games, because they don't really serve a purpose anymore at that point. And if you're wondering how 14 teams works in a bracket, it would be the top 2 teams would get a bye, and then 3 through 14 would play each other, which feels to me like it really degrades the regular season because the top 2 are going to get a bye. I wonder who that's going to be every single year. It'll be the SEC champion and the Big Ten champion, who don't have to play that extra game and are guaranteed a much better shot at a national championship. And at the same time, it just, when you get to the point where the difference between being ranked number 3 and number 14 is almost marginal, you're playing in the first round no matter what. You're really just, if you're on the road or at home, that you're really starting to lose the value of the regular season at that point, in my opinion. Like, it's going to be more like college basketball for some teams, which I'm not saying it's 14 out of 134 teams and 68 Power 5. It's still not a lot of teams are going to make it, but you lose stakes. And yeah, that's what we are moving towards currently.
And all you have to do to poke holes in it and say why this is bad is like, just give one example where it's like, the fourth best Big Ten team is maybe going to be a 9-3, 9-3 Penn State. I don't know why that's the one I came up with, but 9-3 Penn State, and they're getting in because they're the 4th best Big Ten team, whereas maybe the third best ACC, 3rd best Big 12 team is 10-2, and still, they don't make it, but the 9-3 team does, or the 8-4 team does. Like that's going to happen if they do this model. That will happen where you probably, I would guarantee almost that would happen year 1, where a team would get in because they're top 4 in the SEC or the Big Ten, and people be like, that team shouldn't be in the playoff. Like,
do you know who the team in the Big Ten was that finished 4th in the Big Ten standings this year?
Probably not. Let me think. So Michigan would have won it. Oh, yep. Was it Iowa?
It was Iowa. Iowa would have been in the college football playoff. Did anyone want to see Iowa in the college football playoff? Probably not, but that's what we would have got. Now, I will say
the novelty of it, maybe, but
maybe. Actually, I feel like I would have watched the hell out of that game, to be honest with you. But now the caveat there too, and why it's hard to use this year's standings, is that next year the Big Ten includes 4 more teams than it does now, including 3 blue bloods and powerhouses. So my issue with why they even want this is, like I just said, whether it's 14 or 12, the Big Ten and SEC are going to command the vast majority of those at-large spots anyway. To put it in writing is where it gets frustrating, because you're just flat out saying that the example I gave you right before we got on the podcast, and why I think this is bad for UCF and why I'm frustrated that the Big 12 is kind of going to have to agree with it, is you might be saying, hey, the Big 12 gets 2 auto bids. That's awesome. They're guaranteed to have that. That's guaranteed access. One, you're now going to have in writing the power two. You're going to have that the Big Ten and SEC are in writing better and more valuable conferences than everyone else. And that's going to affect recruiting. It's going to affect everything. And it won't be long before the media is using the term power two. It's already kind of happening, I promise you.
Yeah.
Additionally, I ran this scenario by you before we started. It's not out of the realm of possibility in a 16-team conference. Say there's a year that, like, I don't know, Utah is first in the Big 12 and they're 11-1, and Kansas State is 11-1, and then UCF is 11-1, and maybe UCF only played Kansas State, not Utah. So you've got 3 11-1 teams. Maybe one of them's 10-2. It doesn't. Only 2 of them can make it, and one is just going to automatically be kicked out for whoever's fourth in the Big Ten, regardless of how you would directly compare those teams. You might look at their, obviously in the current era of college football, you look at the resumes and say, okay, well, UCF has, I don't know, a road win at Florida or whoever, and has 4 top 25 wins. And fourth place in the Big Ten is, I don't know, it's Penn State, who's been playing kind of badly, and they've struggled with some bad teams, and, you know, they're 10-2 and UCF's 11-1. But now that debate is gone. It's just, well, the Big 12 only has 2 bids and the Big 10 has 4. So fourth place Big 10 goes and UCF has to stay at home. And that, it's just, it sucks that they're going to have to agree to this, because it's really going to hurt the Big 12's standing and reputation. It's really going to hurt UCF's reputation, and reputation aside, because they'll still be considered a power conference. They're not going to be like roped in with the G5 now. They're still a step above. Everyone gets that. But on top of all of that, it's just your window to a playoff spot is just so narrow now. It's kind of shrunk back from what it was in 12, even though there's 2 more teams, and that it's like, yeah, you really basically have to win the conference or come just shy of it, or you're not going. And that's it. That's in writing.
This isn't a way to fix that, because it would still give the 4th place SEC, 4th place Big Ten teams like the power, and just give those conferences the power.
Yeah.
But if it was ever a scenario like that, if this is something they agree to, what they should do in that scenario, I don't know what the tiebreaker would come down to if it was like 2 11-1 teams. They should have, like, I guess it would probably only be for the Big 12 and ACC. They should, instead, since conference championships aren't going to matter, they should just have a tiebreaker weekend where, in that scenario, UCF and Kansas State play, and the winner gets that 2nd spot. And then if there's a tie, just because, I don't know, I think that would be kind of electric.
I don't hate that. And because that's the other issue that we're running into too, is that the ACC has 17 teams, the Big 12 and the SEC have 16, the Big 10 has 18. You can say we're going to take the conference standings. The tiebreakers are going to be nuts, because you're going to have, look at the Big 10, you're having 8. So there's 18 teams in your conference. There are 17 teams that aren't you if you're a Big 10 team. You're only going to play 9 of them each season. So you're going to have to come up with, like, there are going to be teams that, there's going to be a team that's going to finish 4th in the Big 10 over a team that they never played. And it's just, you're just going to have to deal with it. And it'll be, because, you know, they had a better win-loss or whatever. I mean, so yeah, tiebreakers, I don't know. I don't know how you're going to handle that, but they're going to have to figure it out.
I guess in that scenario, in that idea that I came up with, tiebreaker weekend could also apply to 4th place ties in the SEC and Big 10. So you have maybe multiple games on a weekend.
Yeah,
I don't know.
It would just be so hard to schedule that out.
Need one.
That's what I'm saying. Like, what if you just don't? I don't know. But it could be interesting. The other thing I want to point out about why this is worse for UCF is in the 12-team playoff that we're going to have for the next 2 years. Let's talk about 2024. People think UCF is going to be good, possibly very good. I think it's fair to say that those are sort of where the expectations are floating right now. Their over-under for the season is set at 8.5, which is higher than I was anticipating. They're definitely considered not even really a dark horse for the Big 12 title. I think they're going to be in that mix of teams. Now, that mix of teams is like 6, so it's a lot. But either way. Let's say that UCF wins the Big 12 this year. Not that crazy of a notion. I'm not personally predicting it, but not that crazy of a notion. They, in the 12-team format, get a bye in the first round. They'll be the number 4 or number 3 team, most likely, while the Big 10 and SEC are number 1. So they'll get a bye in the first round, and then they'll probably say they're 4th. They'll play the winner of the 5 versus 12 game, and that's their first playoff game. In the 14-team, where it's just auto bids, you don't get a bye. It doesn't matter. You're also not going to jump up to 4th because you won your conference. UCF might be like, they'll win the Big 12 and be ranked like 7th or something. And then instead of, that bye, you're in the first round playing another really good team. It's a lot worse for the Big 12 than the 12-team auto was. It's a lot worse for everybody except the SEC and Big 10, which is why this is happening.
Yeah. And that's the weird thing is, like, you mentioned it when we first started talking about this, was the Big 10 and the SEC want this 14 with 4 auto bids, because even understanding that every year in the 12-team model, most of those 7 at-larges are going to be theirs most of the years. They want it to be like they're not happy with most of the years, but like they're taking away settling that on the field. They're like, we want to be guaranteed these spots, which I think is just, I don't know. I mean, it doesn't surprise me given like the way college football has gone and the way these commissioners act, but anyone who looks at this without bias or without any kind of money involved, if you're a conference commissioner or whoever, it just makes no sense for the sport. Like, why
Yeah.
would you want to do that? Like, you're willfully taking the competition aspect out of it just so they can say, oh, these two conferences are better, so they get 4 spots each. When that's not necessarily like the case. Like, it shouldn't necessarily be like that because there are going to be years where other conferences have better teams and they're 3 and 4. So
And
it's
that's the
just
exact issue right there, is because most years is what you said, and you're
yeah,
exactly right, is that there are always years
all
where
years is
there
what
will
they
be a
want.
year, like maybe once in 4 or 5 years, where the Big 12 was really strong this year and they get 3 or 4 teams in, and that spots the SEC doesn't get. This past year, if we'd had a 12 team, the Pac 12 was really freaking good in its final year. I think pretty much anyone would agree it was a better conference than the Big 10 this year, would have gotten more teams than the Big 10. And it's just frustrating that this is the way college football works. Is it's not like a pro sport. There's no commissioner. It's just different entities all fighting for themselves. And the Big 10 commissioner, who's been pushing the expanded lineup to go to 14, is saying, hey, I've got 18 teams. I've got like six or how many blue bloods are in the Big 10 at this point? I mean, God, Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, USC, Oregon, Washington. You might be able to throw like Michigan State and Wisconsin in there. That's a lot of teams to keep happy
Yeah.
and are not going to be okay with the idea that there might be a year where only two of them go to the playoffs. So he's saying I gotta have it in writing. And I don't even totally get the legal part of it because there are antitrust issues, which is why in the 12-team playoff they just say the top highest ranked. I don't get it, but it's just unfortunate. I don't know. And to be clear, there's not really anything that the Big 12 or your mark can do about it, because in the current contract, the way it worked is that they needed unanimity among all the conferences. They all had to agree to change the system since it was agreed to contract. There's none of that this time. There's no, it's just, you decide whether you want to do it or not. So the Big 12 and the ACC and the G5 know that they're fighting for what they want, but if they push too hard, the Big 10 and the SEC always have the nuclear option of just saying, we don't need you guys. We can
Yeah.
just go do our own thing and completely cut you out. So, and the revenue part of it is also what really hurts UCF, is that in the current 14 playoff, revenue is divided mostly evenly among the Power 5 teams, and then some revenue is set aside and given to the G5. What they're talking about doing for the 14, I guess, if that's what they land on, the new playoff is it's going to be revenue will be based on units, kind of similar to how the NCAA tournament is. And you get basically, I don't know how many games are in a 14 playoff, but the total revenue of the playoff is divided into those games. Then you get one for each time your team wins one of those games and for how many teams you have in the playoff. So obviously if you get more money for more teams you have in the playoff, the two conferences who have it guaranteed that they will always have 4 teams in are going to get more money. Those teams will advance more rounds. Obviously, they'll win the national championship most, if not all years. It's just the revenue gap between the SEC and Big 10 and the Big 12 and ACC is just going to grow like you won't believe as a result of this, and it's already huge.
Yeah, and that's just going back to what you said about if you're the Big Ten commissioner, you have all these teams to keep happy. And they're like, oh, they're going to be upset most years if those years ever happen where it's
Yeah.
like another conference is better. Like, be better then. Play
Yeah.
better. You have control over this if you play well on the field. Like,
You also
it's
didn't have to
just
all be in one conference.
yeah.
You didn't have to do it. And my
That's
favorite, I was
that's
listening, Dan Wetzel from the College Football Inquirer podcast made an amazing point as far as the SEC's role in this too, is the idea that the SEC would ever need auto bids. It's like they were putting 2 teams in a 4-team field. They put two
yes,
teams in a 2-team field when LSU and
right.
Alabama met. Like the idea they need this is laughable. They don't. It's just why
Yeah.
even risk the possibility that one year you only get 3 in, you know?
And that's why like the different ways they're trying to take these decisions and this stuff off of the field is why I'm concerned for the sport. Like
Yeah.
that's bizarre to me. Like that. I mean, it's not bizarre. I understand what they're doing because it's money and it's their conferences and that's what matters to them. But for the sport itself, like this is just not good.
Yeah. And I want to say for UCF, this sounds like a lot of bad news. And for UCF fans, it's like, listen, you're still in the Big 12. The Big 12 is still,
Yeah.
I don't know what the terminology is going to be, but like I said, this isn't a reality right now. The Big 12 is a group of 5 conference. Nothing's changing. It's still going to be a very good conference. It's going to get multiple teams in the playoff every year, presumably. Well, it will if they decide on 2 auto bids, and those teams will win games, and it'll be a fun time, and it'll be infinitely better than if you're like Memphis or USF right now. But at
Yeah.
the end of the day, it's just where and everyone knows this. This isn't news, but the SEC and Big Ten are just becoming their own thing more and more by the year. And we like the term Power Five, and I guess we're calling it Power Four for a couple of years. But fans need to be ready for the fact that we're moving back towards an era where UCF and the league they're in is not considered the same thing as the SEC and the Big Ten. You could argue we're there now, but it'll be more formalized.
What I wonder, and I doubt it. I don't know if there's going to be any sort of compromise on this, but they're talking about Big Ten and SEC want 4 auto bids.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a scenario where they say, okay, we're not doing 4, you're not getting 4 each. You can get 3 each, Big 10 or Big 12 and the ACC, you guys only get 2. So you're still kind of like that. Yeah, Big 10 or Big 10 and the SEC are a better, quote unquote. But those 2 that they aren't getting, for like the other one is 4, they get 3 now. Those 2 are now more out. There's 2 more at large spots.
Yeah.
Like,
And I
I
should
guess that would be
clarify that.
slightly better, but
And I should clarify that too. This system has not been agreed upon. Like that's
right.
where this isn't set in stone. In fact, the reason they're all arguing over this, and it was Washington State's AD who originally gave the media the heads up that they're talking about auto bids and how all this came out originally. So yeah, they could come back, and when they announce it within a month, which they're claiming they're going to do, and I think they are, because the Athletic had a pretty scathing article about how ESPN offered them a contract for the 12-team playoff like months ago now, said we'll sign it, and college football said, well, we're just going to debate about this and fight over it for a few more months. And ESPN is apparently getting very pissed and is now threatening to pull the offer. So they're going to decide something in the next few weeks. Yeah. But they could come out of that room and say, actually, we talked about it and we're doing 3 each, and 3 for them and 2 for the ACC and Big 12. And that leaves more spaces. It's still crazy because you still have in writing that the SEC and Big 10 are better, exactly. But whatever. The other thing to keep in mind is that while it wasn't as seriously discussed as 14 team, there have been discussions around 16 teams as well, as kind of a way to combat the auto bids, and that instead of just 1 at-large spot, there's 3, which, like, I don't know, maybe it's a little more cushion for like the example I gave if there's 3 11 and 1 Big 12 teams or something. Right. But once you're at 16, it's like, what does the regular season mean? There'd be no buys at that point either. It's just a 16-team bracket. I don't know. None of it's good. I don't know. None of it's good. And UCF will be fine because this is still the best position they've ever been in the history of their existence as a program. But there's a ceiling. There was always going to be some sort of ceiling, and the SEC and Big 10 are just continuing to be more and more of their own thing, And I don't know. I guess I'd be curious to ask the average UCF fan, what do you want this program to be long term? Because I don't know.
You get a lot of delusional answers.
I guess you would, because if your end game is I want UCF to be Ohio State, or, well, they're a bad example because they never win the national championship, but I want UCF to be one of these powerhouses that it's just amazing every year. They're always winning 10 or 11 games, and they're, and they're winning the national championship. I don't know if UCF can win a national championship ever. I don't know if they could in the 12 team, even the one we really like they're doing for 2 years. I just think that because you have to win 3 to 4 games against other national championship contenders. And I just think there are very, very few rosters that can ever be built to do that. I think it's always going to be I do think that that's the one downside. And it's kind of funny when you talk about more access. I do think more access is actually going to result in more national championships for the same teams, because, like, look at Georgia, right? Georgia was probably the best team in college football this year, but they lost to Alabama in the SEC title game. They don't make the playoff. If it was 12 teams, they'd be the 5 seed, and they'd probably steamroll some teams and go in the national championship. So I don't know. I guess it's just, if you're a UCF fan, and we'll view college, I know I'm just rambling a little bit now, and we'll view college football differently. We'll probably view it a little more like the NCAA tournament, right? Like, there are college basketball programs that know they'll probably never win a national championship, but they still cherish those years where they make an Elite 8 run, or they're in the Sweet 16 often. And we might look at football a little more like that, where it's a tournament where UCF's ceiling might be they make the playoff almost every year and they win a couple games, but I don't know. Is that not enough? Because I'm not sure what's possible past that ever, even if everything's going perfectly.
What you just said was interesting. Is like down to its very core. Like, that's, even if, say, Georgia would got in this year as a 5 seed and steamrolled, and it's the same team winning the national championship again. Like, you kind of want, like, not, you don't want them to be the same team every time, but, like, you want the best team to win the national championship, but you want them to have to go through, you don't want them to just have 2 games and that's it. You know what I mean? Like, it's if Georgia comes out of a 12 team, it feels different than if they get they made it in as the 4 this past season, and they just make it them again. 100%. Like, it's the same 4 teams all the time. Like, if you're maybe the same 4 teams at the top, but you have the other ones competing for it, it'll feel like you're actually getting a true champion, which that's what the whole expansion was supposed to be. And I guess it is, at least for now, and we'll see where it goes from there. But
I mean, that is the detail. What you just said is that I think a lot of people are missing, and I'm not so much talking about UCF fans as just college football fans in general, is expanding the playoff was never about about changing who wins the national championship, because you can't really change that. It was about earning it. It was about access. It was about keeping the whole sport engaged, because in this 4-team era in particular, it just got to the point where there were so many programs who were just kind of like, why do we even bother caring? Because there's no shot at this. And then additionally, what also happened was that just the way the playoff was covered and the way fans cared about it and the way media cared about it, it got to the point that everyone considered their season a failure if they didn't make the playoff, even though it was just 4 teams. Like, you had Minnesota fans who have had like one good season in 20 years. They went 10-2 and didn't make it, and were like, what a bad year. Like, it's just, so it had to expand because it's all that matters now.
Yeah.
But yeah, and that's the thing about who wins it, is you look at the NCAA tournament, which we love. I think no one would argue with me that that's probably considered the best sporting event in America, right? Everyone loves March Madness.
I think so.
Yeah. And the way March Madness works is that everyone has access, so everyone has a chance, everyone's involved. You get your awesome Cinderella stories. We love seeing St. Peter's, we love seeing UMBC or whoever. And then let's be real, you get to the Elite Eight and the Final Four, and it's the Blue Bloods, and we then watch the best teams play each other in awesome games. Like, and
unless
we're all
it's
fine
last
with
year.
that. Unless it's last year, which was a very weird year. And college basketball's been all messed up for a little bit now with the COVID year and NIL and all that. But
San
either
Diego
way,
State win last year. Did I make that up? They won, right?
UConn won.
UConn won. San Diego State was in the title game.
Yeah, it was UConn versus San Diego State. But yeah,
bizarre.
UConn won it. But yeah, so that's the thing, and we're all okay with that, and it'll be like that in football in the 12 or 14 team, even with these stupid auto bids, is we'll get opening rounds where, hey, everyone was involved. We got to see the ACC, we got to see the Big Ten, we got to see the Group of Five, we obviously saw the Big Ten and the SEC. Then a couple rounds later, there will be 3 games total left. We get to the semifinals, and it's like, okay, it's the best freaking teams. They're going to play awesome games, so that's cool. It's just deciding it with auto bids and locking people out is dumb and hurts UCF. So we're sad about it.
The last thing I wanted to ask, and this might be like the last topic we talk about with college football playoff for now, unless you have anything else you want to hit on, but going back to what we're talking about for the next 2 years, what's in stone, what's signed off on 2024 and 2025, how did they end up settling the whole, because I remember there was a whole thing about the top 4 seeds who get buys or were upset that they would then miss out on having home games and the revenue that comes with that. Was there anything that like, was that just kind of like, yeah, we'll just deal with it? You get a bye and you get to the next round.
Yes.
So
what Bailey's referencing, if you're not familiar with the 12-team model, is that the quarterfinals and semifinals are the New Year's Six bowls. That's 6 total games. So that's where they're played. So the teams that get buys obviously don't play a playoff game on campus. They go straight to the bowl game. So it'd be your first round games are all on campus. Then your quarterfinals are in like orange, sugar, fiesta, and peach. And then your semifinals are in rose and sugar, and those rotate between. So like then the next year, orange and cotton will be the semifinals.
And then is the final is the final also?
The final's just like what it is now, where it's because they've already decided those sites like 6 years out where the national championship game is going to be played. So it'll just be around. But yeah, and that was the main complaint people had with the 12 team. And I think it's valid of that. So you're basically, if you win your conference championship, you then don't get to have a home playoff game because they don't do those in the second round. Yeah. That is dumb. I'm going to remind you what I said earlier is that this was not a new contract. It was a modification to the current college football playoff contract, which the Bulls are heavily involved in, and they need unanimity to change it. So there was nothing they could do. The expectation is that the Bulls will probably over time have a smaller role in future playoffs, even though they might. We have no idea what the Bulls role is.
Which gives me mixed feelings.
I go back and forth on it, to be honest with you, because I think you add value back to the regular season if you eliminate the Bulls, because then it becomes about like, if it like being a higher seed in a 14 or 16 team playoff matters more if you're guaranteeing home field through the playoffs, right? Like that adds value back to the regular season. But I also like the idea of the Rose Bowl not being part of the postseason, the important part, but like the Rose Bowl just being like 7-5 Arizona State versus like 6-6 Purdue, something feels like deeply wrong to me. So I don't know. Maybe the semifinals, you say like once you get to the semis, you do bowls. Then it's just like Rose and Sugar. Those are the 2 most prestigious. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure whatever they decided, it'll be the stupidest thing they could think of, since that's
right. I'm sure it'll all make sense in the end. No, it won't. But all right, I think we can leave that there for now. The other topic I wanted to get into was news for much happier for UCF. Big news for UCF getting a $6.5 million donation from Taylor Gehring. I'm saying that right? Taylor Gehring.
Taylor Gehring.
5.5 million of it's going to UCF, like their facilities and all that stuff, and 1 million is going directly to the Kingdom NIL. So that's a lot of money.
And Taylor Gehring's reward is the new, very cool spaceship-looking building is now going to be the Taylor Gehring something. There's a rest of the name for the building.
Imagine having that kind of money where you could just give this money away.
I was thinking about that, which first off, shout out to Taylor Gehring for this amazing largest donation in program history. Thank you for being UCF's mega booster. I guess maybe their first ever mega donor. Is that
big? Thank you. But the jokes were kind of funny when people initially were like, "This is crypto money. Like, are we sure?"
Ethereum co-founder. So yeah, I thought that was funny too. But yeah, I mean, I seriously, and to be clear, I think we're all aware that Taylor Gehring's been donating before this, and I think he's been a big part of the Kingdom's success these last couple of years. So not a new face, but still very cool to sort of put a public face on someone who's helped out UCF a lot. But yeah, it's really funny how much college football has changed, right? Because what do you think before I thought about it, and I'm fine, like I'm thrilled about this, but what do you think my initial reaction was when I saw the news?
Oh, I remember. You told me what your
did I text you about it? Okay,
yeah, you did text me about it. So if you want to share it yourself, I'll let you share it rather than guessing it.
I was upset that he gave so much to athletics instead of the Kingdom. I was like, why not just give all $6.5 million to the Kingdom and let them buy a freaking all-star team. And I recognize that's dumb because athletics still needs to operate and $5.5 million. And also I want the lazy river, right? And I can't claim, which I still don't believe is happening, but I can't claim that I want all of the kingdom and I also want the lazy river. But yeah, I mean, $5.5 million is huge. I think we know that UCF Athletics has pretty significant facilities ambitions for the coming years, and it's been a situation. They've been fundraising nonstop for them, as we know. I told you on the last podcast that UCF is lying to you if you're a donor and they tell you they're going to build the lazy river, and I'm still stand by that. It's not the Taylor Gehring lazy river, let me tell you. So not sure
That's
if that
the
one's ever
crazy
happening.
thing is as much as they talk about this lazy river since what was it 2016, 2017?
2017.
Whack with an old AD, this idea
Yep.
has carried over now to this new AD. As long as they've been talking about it, you would think a $5.5 million donation to athletics, that would be like, all right, it's happening now. Like we broke ground tomorrow. That's
Which
what
they
we're
also
doing.
got, which I'm a little
It's
confused on where exactly. They didn't specify, but so his name is going on the new football operations building or the football center. It's
which
going to
looks
be the
awesome. Like the
Taylor
renderings
Gehring
of all
Football
of this
Center,
look so cool.
which we've had these renderings for like a year, by the way.
I know,
Some
but seeing
people are
them
like, "Wow,
again,
these are new." They're not, but that building looks freaking cool.
yeah,
It looks so spacey and awesome. But anyway, the lazy river is part the McNamara Cove. We'll go by the official name since this is a donations talk. The McNamara Cove is part of that center. It's like that building is like opens out onto the lazy river. So I'm
right,
like, if they build that building, does that mean they have, because they're building that building, like that's happening.
yeah.
And I'm like, does that mean they have to do lazy river, or are they just going to build the building and say that's a parking lot now? I don't know. I'm skeptical, but either way, $5.5 million. They had the big donation fairly a couple months back towards the lazy river too. I mean, I think they're actually finally going to be able to start building some of this stuff. And then Terry Mohadri said that spring of 2024, which is now, is when they're going to start. I think he said when he talked to Mark Daniels, and I think it's been pretty out there anyway, that they're starting pretty minor. They're just going to move one of the practice fields after spring ball is over, because that area where the practice fields are now is where this is all going to get built. So they'll have that space. And then the Orlando Sentinel had that Terry Mohadri said that some of these things, keyword some, are going to be completed in 2026. So I suspect that the Taylor Gehring football building will be open in 2026. The lazy
Yeah.
river, I am skeptical of.
What's interesting, and this is obviously really great news and really cool to see all of this. I just think of and then this is just my brain, is the logistics of all of this stuff is fascinating to me.
Go
Like the
on.
logistics of moving one of the practice football fields. It's like, what is that? You're not moving it. You're
You're
just
not
getting
moving.
rid of
You're
that one. And
destroying one, and
it's funny the way they keep saying we're gonna move one of them. It's like, no, you're destroying one. You're gonna redo the whole thing. But like even just that, like erasing the football field where it is right now and then resetting all that stuff up like on the other side of the other one. Like that's just it's already a weird concept, but like seeing that happening because we're just so used to what it looks like now. I don't know, just whenever this stuff starts to finally pop up, and I mean that building, like you said, the building's getting built. Like whenever this stuff starts to pop up, like the
cool.
athletics village is going to look way different than how we know it. I mean, I think a lot of it, like because of it's an athletic, because of it being an athletics village, it's not built like that everywhere. Like I've
No.
loved that about UCF where they do have all of their facilities and in that one little clump. And I know softball's a little bit on the edge of that clump, but
Still,
it
you're right. I
is.
don't think the average fans understand how rare that is, that because most of
Yeah.
these schools started their programs and their campuses in like the 1800s. So stuff's just, you should read up on Cincinnati and all the deep
Well,
issues they've had with their
it's
facilities.
something you and I have noticed when we've gone to
Yep.
we've done road trips at other schools. We usually like to do like a campus tour or something, and we've done Memphis, we've done Louisville, we've done Cincinnati now, and it's like it's not like this everywhere else. And
No.
I don't want UCF fans to take it for granted because and UCF students and alum like all that stuff. Like it's the way it already is set up. Like they've really done this really well. And now the fact that they're getting this kind of money to build it up even more, it's going to be up there. And I know like the landscape is like these things don't matter as much as they used to because of NIL and because of what college football and college athletics is. But this stuff, like I think it's still important and it's still cool. Like
It still matters a lot,
yeah,
honestly. Like it doesn't matter like what it did 10 years ago at all. And that's
right.
honestly fine, because you would see stuff like LSU build a football locker room that looks 1 million times nicer than anything we'll see in the NFL. That didn't make sense, but it was because
Yeah.
they couldn't pay players. So you had to do things in other ways. But having strong facilities still matters a ton, especially a lot of the facilities work, which I want to run through that UCF's done in recent years, is practical facilities work. It's the weight
Yeah.
rooms, it's training rooms, it's the things you're actually using day to day. And one of the big things about building that new football center is it frees up the Wayne Dench building to be renovated and for them to really use that space in a different way, since a lot of stuff would be moving into the new football building. I just want to say really quickly, this is all part of the Sharon and Mark Hagel Gateway, by the way, which is they're also around this new building after they move this practice field and all that. They're building, like, they're planning to at least this very nice plaza in that area. That's going to look very, very nice. And it's going to be like, because that's the one thing the Bounce House misses, is it doesn't really have a very solid, like, nice entrance anywhere. I think that, like, where they do night walk, what's that called? I should probably know, since I'm like, UCF podcast. Iowa Plaza, thank you, is like the only kind of nice-ish area. This would be like a full-on, like, right outside the stadium, really cool spot. I wanted to say something before we get too far away. You talked about moving the field, right? Yeah. And how, like, they have to move the field. It's so funny you say that, because I feel like it's hard to have a sense of how expensive doing anything is. How much do you think it costs to move that field?
A lot more than you would think. I don't know how much. I mean, $1 million.
I saw a number like a year ago now that the part of this plan that was, which this was in one of their documents somewhere, because they had to outline all this at one point for the board of trustees. The part of the plan that is taking that field, we're talking about it like they're actually picking up the field.
It's like Patrick Starr when he was like, we move Bikini Bottom and just push it somewhere else.
Removing the one practice field and then putting a new practice field on the other side of the current one was going to be a $5 million operation. That's insane. And I don't get how, but it is.
The only thing I can think is, and I don't have any concept of how much this stuff costs. That's funny. I'm looking. I have my second screen of a screensaver of the Bounce House, and so I can see the two practice fields, and I just noticed that it doesn't matter. The resodding, I guess, is expensive, but other than that, I will say that you're building the fence around it again. Yeah, I guess.
I will say that I think it's going to be a little nicer. I think the towers and everything for the coaches are going to be a little more dedicated and not just, like cherry picker cranes. So I think there are things like that, but it's just crazy how quickly costs add up and that gets done. I guess you're hiring a construction crew and they all have to be paid. Like that blew my mind. And it just really puts into perspective how expensive things are, man.
Yeah. Well, what's funny about this stuff is, like you mentioned, how there's not really a nice entrance like that. Where they're building all this stuff is where I walk into the stadiums. Like I've said on the podcast before, like I park on the other side of campus and just walk through campus to get there. And I'm usually walking right by that little parking lot between, what's that building? That's not the Wayne Dench. What's the other building? The one where they have
the current football or the main athletics building?
Yeah.
The new one, right? The one they built not too long ago?
I think, yeah. And then it has like the ones that has I can only think of it as like the ones that have the uniform mannequins up front and like the big screen.
No, that's Wayne Dench. That building's
that's Wayne Dench? Yeah. What's the one that's on the other side then? Where we used to do press conferences.
Where we used to do press conferences, which I don't know what it's called. It's just their main athletics building.
Oh, I thought that was
I don't know if it has a name. That one was built a few years ago. Which, by the way, this means nothing to anyone except people who have covered the team, but I think you all know the building we're talking about, the UCF building, the one with the big shiny UCF logo on the front of it, the main athletics building where everything is. That we used to be a courtyard where like all media access was held, and now it's a building, and that really weirds me out. It makes me feel old, but yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, so I walk through that building. There's a little parking lot between that building and the practice fields. And that's like where I walk through to get to my gate. And it is. I'm just walking through a parking lot. Like the idea that all of this stuff, well, first of all, we'll see what the construction's like. I might not be able to walk that way anymore for a little bit.
You're probably done. Yeah.
But just what it's going to look like in the end. Like, actually, I don't even know if I can walk through it if it's like where the lazy river and stuff is. I don't know if it flows at all.
Well, no, they're building a plot like that area. They're building.
Yeah. So that plaza will be for like, we'll fay it. Like, so fans will walk through. Okay. Yeah. There's the idea of walking through that, comparing it what it is now to what it's supposed to look like is a completely different experience. So, and
there are photos out there. If you're listening, you can go look it up. Just type in Sharon and Mark Hagel Gateway. There's lots of, it's very nice looking. I wanted to do something that we rarely do on this podcast. I wanted to talk about things Terry Mahadra's done that are good. As you know, if you listen, we give Terry Mahajdra a lot of grief on this podcast, and rightfully so, because he does things that frustrate me. But
a lot of it's for like the little things too, like the basic things. Yeah,
it's the Peter uniforms, man. It's the Peter uniforms. It's accidentally saying that you turned down a Washington series to schedule FAU. It's things like that. Anyway, I want to talk about, because I thought the entire list was pretty good. And this came out of something you said on our past podcast, but the facility changes they've made since Mahajdra got here have been pretty extensive, and I wanted to run through them all really quickly. So you mentioned the lobby of the Wayne Dench building. We've got the giant screen and the uniforms in the backdrop, that whole nice entryway. That was not there before. The giant screen was actually hanging in the weight room, and they took it down and put it there.
Even like throughout that building, like the wraps on the building, like the pictures and the old, like the NFL wall, that kind of stuff, and then like all moments from UCF history, like that kind of stuff, even that.
They did throughout all athletic facilities. They did a good job of like the cheap ways to just gussy up a building, like just
Yeah.
really like nice backlit logos. My favorite part
Pictures
of
that your
facilities.
photographers took too.
Yeah, like literally just getting walls, little things like that.
Yeah.
The women's basketball and men's basketball locker rooms were both heavily renovated and are light years better than they were before. The volleyball locker room was similarly renovated. The venue weight room was renovated and a new snack courtyard area was added there. John Juliana Park has gotten a new outfield wall. It's gotten new turf. It's gotten a new video board. The Plex got a new locker room. It also got a new outfield wall. The football lounge was renovated and added tweaks there for the football players, and they put $12 million into ad-fi in the venue, which we've already seen pay off both in the practice facilities for the basketball teams and the volleyball team, as well as some of the fan experience stuff in the arena. That's a lot for like being an AD for 2 years, basically. That's a lot to get done.
Yeah, no, that's when you list it all like that, it makes me feel a little bit bad that I've said I just don't really like what he's doing. But
I don't feel bad at all.
Like I said, it's the little stuff
issues,
like you mentioned,
yeah.
the pewter, all the stuff with the baseball broadcasts and all that right now. Like so, there's things that have happened where I'm like, oh, it makes me. That's at least a reminder for me that like it's not all bad. Like he's done a really good job with that kind of stuff. And I even just stupidly even said that on the podcast I think last week where I was like, yeah, he's raised all this money. Like, what have they done? And they've done a lot of stuff when you really put it in that perspective. So.
But it's funny because there were some of it was low hanging fruit too, to be honest, just because Danny White, his one big thing was he really neglected UCF's facilities. I don't know why. And scheduling. Okay, there were a couple, but all right. Danny White was maybe only good at hiring coaches, but that's the most important thing to be good at. But, I am, as you know, if you listen to this podcast, we're not really those to just take a stance and write it no matter what. There are both pros and cons to Mahadra's AD. As I said on the last podcast, he's good at most of the important stuff and really bothers me with the unimportant stuff. But yeah, facilities are... He's a builder. I mean, that was his thing at Arkansas State too. I think that was one of his main appeals to UCF when they were looking for an AD is he's good at getting stuff built. And Lazy River, TBD, still don't believe it. We'll never buy that happening. But I think we know that this football operations building is happening and it looks freaking awesome. And once again, shout out to Taylor Gehring for helping make that a thing.
Yeah, and that's also we kind of only lightly brushed on it, but the million to the kingdom is huge too.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious. Do you think that because this stuff has to be like it's not like Taylor Gehring called up UCF last week and was like, got some money, like let's talk about it. Like this stuff is worked out over weeks and months, and I'm kind of curious if the kingdom has known this is in the works because they've just been having so many wins lately. I don't know. I'm curious. Like I don't know if this means that the kingdom is now going to do more than they've done before, or just they've already been operating under the assumption that they're getting this money.
Yeah, I don't know. But either way, it's all really, really cool and really good. Yeah, I'm excited to see this stuff get built and just see what UCF. And
we're so excited for this building. I'm never going to be in this building.
No, I know. But no,
but it's just dumb? It looks so cool.
You know what's really dumb, actually, because it's going to make both of us feel old, is like, I know there are alums that come to campus now that are like, oh, none of this was here when we were here. Yeah. Like pretty soon when they start to build this stuff, it's like Athletics Village is going to look completely different from when we were students, 6 years ago? Yeah. Is it? No. Yeah, 6 years ago, 6, 7 years ago. Like that's crazy. And I mean, it
already, just from when I compare, like when I first started covering the team, like 2015, 2016 to right now, there's already a lot of stuff that's different. I mean, everything's been repainted. Everything was gold back then. Yeah. Like I said, I did interviews in a courtyard that doesn't exist anymore. It's a building.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that because I think it might have been for the Oklahoma State game. I can't remember for sure, but yeah, I think it was because my girlfriend and I went to that game and we walked in between that building and the indoor practice facility where it's just kind of like a really narrow sidewalk now. Yeah. And I'm like, before when I was a student here, we used to do interviews right here. And there was no, like, this wasn't here. And
they've actually done, because then they've also built, I don't know what the building's called, the Student Athletes Academic Building, that big building on the one side of the stadium. That's been built since we started covering the team.
Yeah. Is that the one the Garvey one hasn't that been built, or is that
Garvey's been built? And I was going to say there was a time where because I think Garvey that was a recruiting lounge, and we would do media day in there, and that's the Garvey Center now. We did press conference stuff in that academics building for a couple of years, and now that's in the new media room that they renovated a couple of years ago. Like it's funny you say, oh, it's like it has already changed. It's like that's the thing about, and it's the cool thing about being a fan of like a young university and a young athletics program is it's UCF. It's under construction forever. Like it's always changing and always evolving. And 10 years from now, if I could like time travel and just show you a photo of like the athletics village in a decade, you'd probably be like, what the hell? Because it's going to look
like, where was that one thing that I like walked by every single day of my college life?
And it's funny you say that, and this is kind of a tangent and not athletics related, but like my dad went to UCF. If you're listening, you probably know that. I say it regularly. And he was on the podcast. He was on the podcast long time ago. He brought us on to tell us some fun UCF stories from back in the day. I think
he brought us on.
Is that what I
You
said?
brought
No, no,
him
no.
on.
We brought him
Yeah.
on. Yeah, I phrased that
Yeah.
wrong.
Yeah.
Which I don't want to paraphrase, but there was the one story about when he worked for the school newspaper and his friend got a call from the coach because they pranked him or something, which that's how
Yeah.
different. Yeah. Okay. So really, really quickly, I don't want to like butcher the story. That's how different UCF football used to be. Is at one point when my dad was a student at the school and working for the school paper, he and one friend pranked another friend by telling them, "Hey, the head coach of the football team is looking for you over that thing you wrote." And he was like, "Oh my God." And then just called the head football coach. He was like, "I hear you're
Yeah.
looking for me." He's like, "Nah, someone's missing you." Dude, I'm just gonna call up Gus Malzahn. But
Yeah.
I was going somewhere with this. I'm gonna say it really quickly. That was way back, like summer of 2020, back when like COVID was still a thing and like there wasn't much going on. At one time, I just took my dad to like we just like went to campus. I think I went on to like grab Qdoba or something, and he obviously is on campus all the time for the football games, but you don't necessarily like venture deep into campus. They're over in like the
Yeah.
softball lot. So we were just walking through campus, which obviously he was there like 30 years ago, 40 years ago, and I think 30. And he's just looking around. He just and he shows me like this very narrow edge of campus. It was like the reflecting ponds, everything basically past the library and like Libra. And he's like, "You see this little area?" I'm like, "Yeah." And he's like, "This was the campus when I was here." And nothing else existed. And I'm like, that's freaking weird. And it
Yeah.
freaked me out for what I'm gonna like be thinking when I'm taking my kid there in like a couple
That's
decades. And I'm gonna be like,
crazy.
"Yeah, we didn't even have spaceships back then on campus. It's crazy."
Oh, it's bizarre, but it's really cool. A lot of it is really
Very,
cool.
very
So
cool.
shout out Taylor Gehring. Shout out to all of that. Yeah, so we'll get on. The only thing in football news really this week, I'll remind everyone, we talked about at the top of the podcast, was that voting has begun for Uniswag's Uniform of the Year. So make sure you get on and vote for UCF's 2023 Space Uniforms. If you did it at the top of the podcast, do it again right
That's
now.
what I was gonna say. Thank
There you
you.
go.
Yes.
Yeah,
Do it.
that'll help big time. And you might know this. I might be putting you on the spot here. How many times UCF won it in recent years? I know they've won it.
I should know
I
that
don't
off
know
the
if
top of
they've
my head.
won. Yeah, I don't know. I know they've won Uniform of the Year and recently, like they've won Helmet of the Year. I think that was maybe 2019. And the Moon Helmet won Helmet of the Year.
It
I
won
want to say
Helmet of
it
the Year,
did.
but that did not win Uniform of the Year, which I was
Yeah.
honestly okay with. So they've won Uniform of the Year in 2018 and 2021. They've won Helmet of the Year in 2019.
Okay. Yeah. No. So they've
Yep.
been well represented, but let's make sure it happens again because the space uniforms were fantastic. If I
Awesome.
had known you were going to wear your space uniform, I would have put on mine from this year because I have the jersey.
Oh man, you should have. Yeah, I should have.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's
Yeah.
the one
I
that we're
didn't know.
voting on too. By the way, if
Yeah.
you're listening to this and you voted again when we just told you to vote again a minute ago, go ahead and vote again right now.
Yeah. Keep doing it.
Just
You
keep
have
doing
nothing
it,
to do, just
please.
refresh
I beg
until
you.
you get the forbidden message that
If you
you
ever
got.
think about stop voting, consider what Twitter will be like if Florida or Miami win and UCF doesn't. And
Yeah.
I actually think Texas Tech is the biggest competitor this year, to be
I got
honest
I
with
got
you. But
even
we'll
I
see.
didn't honestly didn't even look at the other
West
candidates. Like I
Virginia
don't
is
know.
nominated for just like one of their uniforms, and I
It
don't
shouldn't be
understand
they shouldn't be
why.
nominated for anything because their colors are I just don't. I just don't
They have
like
that, and
colors.
they're nominated for one that has pretty harsh colors. But there are a lot of Big 12 teams nominated. Houston's nominated for their Oilers throwbacks. Rice is also nominated for their Oilers throwbacks. But we've
That's
got West Virginia. It's the yellow version of their Country Roads uniforms. We've got Texas Tech for their throwback uniforms. TCU for those like weird anthracite and red ones with the new frog decal.
oh yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
What's the Florida one that's nominated?
Their blackout, which
Oh,
wasn't
that's
good.
stupid.
Wasn't good. Miami's also
That's
nominated for their
ridiculous.
blackout. Miami and Florida are nominated for a uniform combo UCF does multiple times every year
That's
and does
insane.
better than them. So that's cool.
They're not even good.
Tennessee's
All
on
right.
here too. You don't like Josh Heupel? Vote.
Which one's Tennessee? Is their blackout or
They're
their
Smoky Mountains, which weren't good this
okay.
year. They had this like orange plating on the top that I hated, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Anyway,
Yeah.
go ahead.
None of those are good. Vote for UCF again. Hopefully throughout this
A
podcast you've
lot of
voted
them are
4 or 5
good, but
times.
UCF's was really good.
Yeah, sure. Game of the week is the series coming up next weekend or this weekend. UCF baseball is at home hosting South Florida. So we talked about it, I think last week. Oh yeah, on the mailbag question about whether or not we'd see USF on the schedule for football or any of those other sports, and they're on the schedule for baseball. They play a 3-game series this coming weekend. UCF baseball's 4-0 so far. They beat
Yeah.
wait no, they're 5-0.
5-0 right now. Yep, they won
Yeah, they're
today.
5-0. They won one on Sunday. So 5-0. They play, I believe, FAU before they get to that series, and then South Florida's 4-2, and they play at Florida State before they get to that series. But Friday at 6, Saturday at 6, and Sunday at 1, a 3-game series. I'm pretty bummed that I have to miss out on it, honestly. I was looking originally like, oh, this is one that I want to come up for the weekend for. And then I realized I'd be at the combine until I get home like 9 o'clock on Saturday night. So
And there's big
So,
news too. If you are, don't live in Orlando or don't, have the ability to just go to a baseball game, UCF has been gracious enough to broadcast 2 of those 3
2 of
games
the
on
3.
ESPN Plus. Not all
Which
3,
ones are they?
because
Is it
let's
Friday
not
and
get
Saturday or
crazy.
Friday and Sunday?
I think it's Friday and Saturday.
Friday? Yeah, I probably should know that.
Because let's not get crazy. You
Talk
don't
for
need
a
all
second. I'm going to
3.
look that up.
If I talk for too long, I'm just going to go into another tirade about this whole ESPN Plus situation with UCF, where UCF, who for years has put all of their games on ESPN Plus, now that they are in the Big 12 and getting more money than they've ever gotten before in their entire existence as an organization, are crying poor and are saying they can't broadcast these games. So
Yep.
that's where we're at right now.
Friday and Sunday, by the way. So Friday and Sunday for those games are on Big 12 Now / ESPN Plus. So you take what you get and you'll like it. All right. I was so annoyed on Friday because I was like waiting. I was like, oh, baseball's about to start. And I was like, oh, wait, is this one of the games they're broadcasting? Sure wasn't.
It's some of the angriest I've been with UCF Athletics in recent years, because I think it is so beyond insulting to the fans to take this away. I don't care what the reasoning is. I know that people are like, I know there's been stuff in the dungeon about like, oh, well, there's budget stuff and whatever. There are a lot of things to cut before setting up a single cam and just broadcasting a game. You exist for the fans. That is why you as an organization exist. You don't take away fans' ability to watch their damn team play games. It's wrong.
And I know this weekend, I don't have the numbers in front of me or the tweet in front of me, but I know Brandon Helwig posted how Samford's a good baseball program. Like they're usually pretty solid. UCF just swept them. So that's
it's pretty cool.
So 5-0 so far.
Yep.
And they beat Miami last week, which is
really good. And where did they eat before beating Miami?
You as reported by you, as reported by somebody else, Olive Garden.
As reported by Trace Trilco? They ate at Olive Garden.
And apparently the broadcast, I guess. But
I didn't watch the broadcast because I was confused at the notion of another team broadcasting UCF baseball game, and I got my wires crossed and didn't realize I could. But yeah.
All right, cool. Let's get to tweet of the week. And then
tweet of the week. Tweet of the week goes to UCF baseball, who tweeted they were asked during the weekend. Someone replied to them and said, how are these games not anywhere to be watched? Big 12 Power 5. UCF baseball graciously replied, I can't believe they tweeted
this canned answer.
UCF benefits from 18 more home baseball and softball games than the Big 12 average. That's because they're in frickin' Florida and it's cold everywhere else. Than the Big 12 average. The number of broadcasts of our home spring sports will rank amongst the top in the league. I'd like to see the math on that. As part of Mission 12, which is their fundraising initiative, we aspire to provide infrastructure needs to air all home games in the future. UCF baseball just called UCF Athletics poor in a tweet. They straight up said, oh, you want to watch the games? Donate to Mission 12. And I want to be clear because you made a good point last week. While UCF baseball gets tweet of the week, I'm not mad at UCF baseball. I'm sure everyone involved with UCF baseball prefer
That's 2 weeks in a row they got tweet of the week, actually.
Well, show your damn games. I can't overstate how beyond infuriating it is that UCF Athletics has planted their feet and said, sorry, we can't. They literally, and softball's going through this too, but at least for softball, they let Eric Lopez call the games and they set up a single camera. It was still not great that you couldn't have like multiple angles and things like that, but at least I could still watch the game. Baseball, they're literally saying we are too poor to set up a camera.
Yep.
I don't believe them.
Yeah.
I think that's ridiculous. I think that's absolutely insane. I'd like to check Terry Mahadur's salary and see if they can afford to set up a single camera. Is he getting a bonus this year? I'm willing to bet he is.
For the longest time, a lot of the broadcasts for baseball were done by like aspiring, like people from the journalism program, like people.
Two of our good friends who we founded Night Sports Now with called baseball games.
I called a couple innings, actually.
Yeah. Oh, you did?
Now that I think about it, yeah.
There
so
you
I
go.
used to my freshman year, I did a lot of like the cutting up the highlights for them. Like I was kind of in that program for a little bit, like cutting up highlights. And I think a couple times they were just like, "Here, you want the headset?" And I was like, "Sure." So
and even before that was a big thing, even before like ESPN Plus and all that, they would broadcast on Twitch. This moment in time right now is the worst that actual video broadcast coverage has ever been for baseball and softball, and it is while they are finally in the Power 5.
What's hilarious about all of this is like they cut a few games, like because they didn't broadcast any of these Samford games. They're not broadcast, or they're at FAU. So that's on FAU.
Yeah, that's
TV,
on FAU
if you can actually get that. But then you get 2 out of 3 of the USF games next weekend. Then the weekend after that starts conference play. Like because the Big 12 has so many baseball programs and so many conference games. Like then it was really like they needed to cut costs on not showing 5 games.
And that's what extra bothers me, because I've also heard the argument before that I'm not saying is without merit, that I know that there's always been word out there that the ESPN Plus broadcast for the non-basketball stuff, generally it's not a lot of people watching these. I get it. It's the diehards. And I object to that so much on the principle of it that UCF is saying our fans who care the most about UCF athletics are the ones we're not going to prioritize. That's what they're saying. They're saying, oh,
Yeah.
the diehards who want to watch everything, whatever. We can abuse them as much as we want. They're always going to come back anyway. So why not just cut the broadcast and move on?
That's a good point.
It's infuriating. And I know a lot of you have been calling me out on social media for this. I'm not going to encourage you to continue to do that because I'm not sure it's going to change anything. But I'm also not going to discourage you. You do you. Whatever you think is best. But while you're on Twitter trashing UCF for this decision, also go to the Uniswag Twitter account and vote for UCF Uniform of the Year. Again, everyone can vote as much as they want. Please keep voting.
Do it. All right, we will get out of here. We want to thank everyone for listening. Dropping a little early this week, so thank you for everyone tuning in, listening to us all week. And last week we had the mailbag episode. Thank you again for your questions because we had a lot of fun with that. But we'll be back next week with episode 195. Until then, you can find us on Twitter at BaileyJAdams22, at @ByCASimmons, at Night Sports Now, at Pegasus Podcast. You can also find Uniswag on Twitter and go vote for UCF for Uniform of the Year in 2023. Again, thank you guys so much for being with us. We'll talk to you next week.
Bye, everybody.